So when you get to the end of your rope, is there anything left that you can do? Anybody got any ideas? What do you do when you get to the end of your rope? Tie a knot and hang on. Now, it's a funny old, I don't know how old it is. I don't think it goes that far back. It's a funny thing, but boy, there's a lot of truth in that. There is an enormous amount of truth in it. And seriously, that's what I want to talk about this afternoon after having this morning talked about the question of the fact that we've got to become winners, is what is it you do after you have done all you can? Because there are times when you come right down to it that way. You ever found yourself lying in bed at night, unable to go to sleep, because you were afraid of something that might happen or something that was going to happen, or you weren't just afraid of it, you knew it was going to happen? And you've lain there awake, not able to sleep, fretting and stewing over it, maybe replaying scenarios in your mind. Well, when he says this, I'm going to say that. And you get all your rehearsals down, you work it all out. And there comes a place in time where you say to yourself, look, go to sleep. You have done all that you can do. Now, there are lots of times in our life when we know that. When we know as far as any additional actions on our part, any new efforts we can make, that really there is nothing we can do. And therefore, we know that we should stop worrying, right? Or we know we should put it away. We know we should let go of this thing, because if there were something else to do in some ways, if we could do something else about it, we probably would do it and feel better. But there come times when your thing is out of your control. It's no longer in your hands. There's not a blessed thing you can do to change anything. And you have nothing else. You've done all you can. Now, my question was, and it's kind of contradictory internally, what do you do after you have done all that you can do? Now, turn back with me to Matthew 24. There's an interesting statement here that I think we all need to try to get a handle on. And it is related to the other subject that we discussed this morning. Jesus says, this is the Olivet prophecy, and the disciples were showing Jesus the buildings of the temple, and he told them, the time was coming when there would not be one stone left upon another here that would not be thrown down, which shocked them terribly to hear that. They had no idea that anything like that was really in the future again, although they knew it had happened in the past. And so when they got away to a private place, they came to Jesus and they said to him, when shall these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? And then follow all this stuff about rumors and wars and rumors of wars and famines and pestilence in diverse places. You go through this terrible list of things that are going to fall upon the earth. And one of the great shockers when you read this list is that he tells you all these terrible things that are going to happen. He says, see that you be not troubled, for the end is not yet. I grew up, even before I ever heard of anybody named Herbert W. Armstrong, hearing that one of the signs of the end was famines and wars and rumors of wars, didn't you? Then you read what Jesus said, and Jesus said, oh no, don't be troubled. Wars and rumors of the wars are going to come, but the end is not yet. Okay. He said these, verse 8, are only the beginning. And you ain't seen nothing yet. There's a whole lot worse than what you have seen that is yet coming. He says, then, they will deliver you up to be afflicted. They will kill you, and you shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. Then shall many be offended, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another. And many false prophets shall arise, and shall deceive many. And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. And I can honestly say I feel that I live in just such a time. Then he says, but he that shall endure to the end, the same shall be saved. So that when you get to the end of the rope, when you have done all that you can do, after you have done all you can do, it seems you still have one more thing, if I may use the word, to do. And that is to endure. He said, those who endure to the end, the same shall be saved. So, when you've been an action person and you've gone out and tackled your problems and you've fought against the devil and you've won, And yet when it all comes down to the end of things and your life is no longer in your own hands, your hands are tied, they put you in the jail, the doors are closed and bolted and barred, and they're going to feed you on bread and water for the next 30 days, so you say to yourself, I can't, it's out of my hands, I'm under someone else's control now. Yeah, nearly. But you still have one more thing you can do. You can endure. What does that mean? Well, the word, whatever it is that endures, lasts. There's this psalm, I think it may be the 118th psalm, and it's a difficult psalm in a way to read, because it'll make a statement about God, and then it will say, for His mercy endures forever. It'll make another statement about God, and it'll say, for His mercy endures forever. Every verse of that psalm is punctuated with the phrase, for His mercy endures forever. You could paraphrase that, His mercy lasts forever. Never runs out, never is exalted. It lasts. It stays. It has staying power. And the fact is, it seems, because He makes the statement, he that shall endure to the end, that's the one that will be saved. What else is there? But those who have staying power. And it seems ultimately to be a winner, ultimately to be an overcomer, ultimately to be the one who finally does make it into God's kingdom, you have to finish your course. You have to close it out, as it were, with this one more thing you have got to do. You have got to last. You've got to have staying power. You've got to be able to tie the knot in the end of the rope and get a grip on it and hang on. Whatever else those people who are going to be in the kingdom of God must do, whatever else they do or don't do, they don't quit. You know, there's a funny thing about it. There are times when you can win simply by outlasting your opponent. You're not better than he is, not smarter than he is, not stronger than he is, but you've got one thing maybe that he doesn't have, and that's staying power. Turn back to 2 Timothy. There's something here, I think, that if you and I can understand, it could possibly make a major difference in our lives. If we can just get a grip on what it means. 2 Timothy, chapter 2, and we'll begin reading in verse 1. 2 Timothy, chapter 2, and verse 1. He says, you therefore, my son, be strong in the grace that is in Christ Jesus. And the things that you have heard of me among many witnesses, I want you to commit to faithful men who can teach other people. We've got to spread this thing out. You therefore, endure hardness as a good soldier of Jesus Christ. There come times and places in your life when you have to make up your mind to the fact that you are not going to be comfortable. When you have to make up your mind that you are going to endure hardship. And you just, if you know you have it to do, and you make up your mind that you're going to do it, you can sometimes settle into a routine like that, and you can last when other people can't handle it, won't handle it, or won't endure it. It's a very simple thing in my own case, but I'd heard about so much about, read about sailing all my life. I knew a lot about it because of what I had read, but I had never really gone to sea in a small boat. And when a friend gave me the opportunity to sail back with him from Mexico, I very willingly flew down there, and we got on his sailboat, and we sailed back from the Yucatan Peninsula to Galveston. And someone asked me once about why did I want to do that, and I said, well, because I wanted to experience what it was like to be in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. And there was no way that I could experience what it was like to be in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico without going there. And the only way I was going to go there and have the experience I wanted was to go there on a sailboat. And when you go out to sea on a sailboat, you have to make up your mind you are not going to be comfortable. There is not a moment when the boat doesn't move. You know, you're pounding in the waves. The boat's leaning over to one side because the winds are filling the sail. There is this little bit of fear that is with you most of the time, because the sea is a very strange place, and strange things happen out there, and people sail off into it and never come back. But I couldn't get there without going there. I couldn't experience it without being there. And I couldn't experience it without enduring hardship. Oh, it was mild hardship. There was really not much to it. But you have to make up your mind that you're going to be 4 hours on and 4 hours off watch. You have to realize that when you go to bed, or your bunk, it's nothing like even resembling a bed, and you're propped up between the bulkhead of the engine on one side and a thin pad about that thick on the other side of the little V trying to sleep, that there's no way you're going to sleep. And you listen to the water going by on the outside of the hull, and you make up your mind you're going to rest. But you know, there's so much of this that I found, and I was not comfortable. But I made up my mind that I had to rest, even though I was not asleep, and I rested. And 5 days later, we got to Galveston. I was very tired, very satisfied. I'd had an experience I otherwise never could have experienced, but a part of the experience was enduring, just lasting. Of course, once you get out there, you haven't got much choice. You are either going to last or jump overboard. I didn't know what else there was that I could do about the thing. He said, endure hardness. And there are times when you have to make up your mind that you are simply going to last. You're not going to last comfortably. It's not going to be pleasant. You're not going to enjoy it. But you are going to last. He said, no man that wars entangles himself with the affairs of this life, because he wants to please the one that's chosen him to be a soldier. And if a man strive for the masteries, he is not crowned, except he strive lawfully. The husbandman that labors must be first partaker of the fruits. Consider what I say, and I want the Lord to give you understanding in all these things. Now remember that Jesus Christ of the seed of David was raised from the dead according to my gospel. Now because of this gospel, I suffer trouble like an evildoer, even to bonds. No, not just jail, bonds, where it actually took him into the cell and clamped, bracelets around there that were on chains and left him in there overnight on more than one occasion. The Apostle Paul had on several occasions been in jail. He had gone to sea on a ship in irons, as it were. There wasn't any chance of him being thrown overboard and swimming to shore. You don't swim with that amount of chains. He was in irons. He said, I have, because of this gospel, suffered bonds, but the word of God is not bound. Therefore I endure all things. In a way, he didn't have a choice. They arrest you. They put chains on you. A bunch of soldiers take you by the scruff of your neck and drag you down and throw you on the ship, and they cast off to take you to Rome. You're on your way. What can I do but endure? But I know there is, it seems to me, a positive decision to stick it out, as opposed to some people who allow themselves to be defeated by the situation they're in. They are helpless. There's nothing they can do, they conclude, and so they stop trying. It's interesting that he goes on to say, I endure everything for the elect's sake, so that they can obtain salvation which is in Christ Jesus with eternal glory. It is a faithful saying, if we be dead with him, we shall also live with him. If we suffer, we shall also reign with him. If we deny him, he also will deny us. If we believe not, he remains faithful. He cannot deny himself. I want to give you another synonym. If we deny him, he will deny us. Essentially, what he is saying is, if you quit. If you quit. Because that's what he's talking about, the context, isn't it? He's talking about enduring. He's talking about the fact that I am in these chains. Why? I'm in a chains because of the gospel, right? It's because of that. There's a reason why I'm in this position that I'm in. Now, if I then give up, morally, I'm not talking about telling the guys that are right, let me go, and they'll let me go. That's not the point. Because they probably wouldn't have let him go. But there is an attitude of mind on his part. There is the fact that he needs to stand for something. The fact that he needs to wear the chains. The fact that he is there wearing the chains makes a statement, and he is going to continue to make that statement. And it's going to be in his eyes. It's going to be in his face. It's going to be in his voice. And he's not going to be dragging there, hung over like a whipped dog with his tail between his legs. He will go in with his head up, and a realization that I am here for the defense of the gospel of Christ. That's what you mean when you say, you endure. And for him to allow himself to be whipped would be to quit. And to quit would be to deny Christ. There is a scripture that said, he that puts his hand to the plow, looking back, is not fit for the kingdom of God. You know it's saying the same thing? It is saying that once you have put your hand to the plow, quitting is no longer an option. Just because you are in someone else's power, just because events are out of control, just because you have done everything that you could possibly be expected to do, does not mean you are finished. You have still got to last. And you've got to play out the string, as it were. You've got to play out your role all the way to the end. You've got to be the martyr. You've got to act like maybe you're not afraid, even if you are a little bit afraid. You've got to stand up for what is right, even when things seem to be completely out of your control. If the last thing that is available to you is to look them in the eye when they kill you, as opposed to letting your head hang down, that is there and you've got to do it. That's what's meant by enduring. Now, if that's what's meant, what about the places that you and I give up? We haven't even gotten to the place where we have to look somebody in the eye while he kills us, have we? We haven't even gotten close. Do you have a similar obligation? The things that God calls upon you to do? To keep your head up? To look them in the eye? To stand for what's right? Even when you don't speak? Even when you have nothing to say? But to last? Because if I'm reading all this stuff right, you know I am, we've got to have staying power if we're going to be a winner. We've already seen that God's not going to have people in His kingdom who are losers. So we're going to have to be able to stay the course, to stick it out. There's another interesting passage too, in fact. One of them is found in 2 Thessalonians chapter 1. And I want you to take a look at this one and consider what it means to you. 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, and beginning in verse 3. We are bound to thank God always for you, brethren, as it is fitting, because your faith grows exceedingly. He says, I'm sorry, I lost my place. The charity of every one of you toward each other abounds, so that we ourselves glory in you in the churches of God for your patience, for your faith in all your persecutions and tribulations that you endure. Notice, not that you just are putting up with, not that have come upon you, but that you endure. Now, this is, I think, he doesn't talk about it strictly in terms of endurance. He talks about two elements that they had in the process of this. They were patience and faith. They settled into the routine that they had to live with. But they didn't quit. They just stepped up to the challenge and did it. But then he goes on to say, the fact that you are facing up to this, that is, that you are enduring, that you are staying with it, you are sticking the course, you've got staying power, is a manifest token of the righteous judgment of God, that you may be accounted worthy of the kingdom of God, for which you also suffer. What is a manifest token? The word manifest basically comes from a word that means to show or to demonstrate openly something. And a token is an evidence, a little thing that you present, something hard that you can actually take and put in a slot, let's say, and get something for it. It's hard evidence, as it were. Now, what he is saying here is a body of people, and the Thessalonians had really been through it. I don't know how many people by this time had died for the faith up there. You have to read through 1 and 2 Thessalonians to get a feeling for what was going on. There had been enormous amounts of persecutions in this area. Now he comes along and he says, I just thank God every time I think about you people, because of what you are going through, and the patience, and the faith, and the courage that you have shown as you have endured this. You've held up, and you've looked them in the eye, and you've stood for what believe, and you have refused to act like a whip dog. He said it means so much. The very fact that you're doing this is a manifest token of the righteous judgment of God. It is something real that can be seen and can be spent, if you will, to get something. The fact of the matter is that our endurance in the face of trials, persecutions, problems, heartaches, whatever it may be, is a manifest token of the righteous judgment of God. You actually are a piece of evidence that God can take into court. Yeah. You think nothing like that ever happens? There was a day when all the sons of God came to appear before him, and Satan also came among them. And he said, "Where have you been?" Satan said, "Oh, going to and fro in the earth, walking up and down in it." Remember what God said after that? He said, "Have you seen my servant Job? That there's not a man like him, not a one, that loves good, hates evil." He actually took Job like a counter and shoved him out on the green tablecloth like a bet. Satan said, "Oh, does Job serve you for nothing? You put a hedge around his house. I can't touch him. He's a wealthy, you made him rich, you protect him, everything's going his way. Anybody would serve you for that. Job's just another hireling." God left the bet on the table. And he said, "Okay, everything it has is in your hands, just don't touch him." Satan left, took the bet. Took away everything Job had, houses, land, children, cattle, everything, stripped him down to nothing, and the man was just broken. But he didn't curse God. He said, "God is given, God's taken away, blessed be his name." The devil came back, and God says, "Now, you see, I'm leaving the bet on the table." And he said, "Then, well, all of a man has, tell you what, all a man has, he'll give for his life. Double or nothing on his life." God said, "Well, I'll tell you what. You can touch his body, but you can't kill him." Satan says, "Done." So out he went. And then he smote him with boils all over from head to toe. You know the story. He sat down in the ashes and took a potsherd and was scraping away on his boils, and his wife comes to him and says, "Curse God and die." The story of Job is a long story. A fascinating story. But one of the great lessons involved in the whole thing is that there are times when, and we don't really know, Job had no idea what was going on. Would you be willing to endure something for God to win a bet with Satan? What a thought, What a thought. And yet, in a sense, that was what was going on. But it wasn't all that was going on. It wasn't all. There was something else going on. What was it? Anybody know? Job needed to grow in some areas, didn't he? Job was a good man. He was a righteous man. Problem was, he knew it, was pleased with it, and was comfortable with it. But in order for him to be the kind of a man God wanted him to be, he really did need to learn to last. The question of staying power, the question of sticking power, had to be resolved. And so it was worth it to God to say, "Well, I'll play this game with you over here." What Satan never knew was that wasn't what the real stake was. Sometimes when we are suffering, and sometimes when we are depressed, and sometimes when we feel like giving up, I honestly think if we could just understand more clearly what the stakes were. But then, haven't you been told? Isn't it in the Bible? Isn't all the evidence about the stakes there for you? The problem is that you kind of forget it. And another side of the story is that you so many times will assume that enduring is something that's just out of your hands. That it is a passive act or non-act. That you just sort of sit there like a bump on a log and you just endure. And that's all there is to it. But you see, just like Job, just like the Thessalonians, there are times when you win by just simply outlasting the opposition. Turn back a few pages to Philippians, the first chapter. Interesting, these are in the first chapters because he's setting up the things that need to be understood. He writes to the Philippians in verse 27, of the first chapter, only let your conduct, your conversation be as it becomes the gospel in Christ, that whether I come and see you or else I be absent, I may hear of your affairs, that you stand fast in one spirit with one mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel. In nothing terrified by your adversaries. Now this is important. Listen to what he's saying. I don't want you to allow yourself in any way to be terrified by your adversaries. One of the things that people look for in us when they afflict us or when they're after us is fear. One of the things the devil wants to smell is fear. We all understand that you don't want to let a dog know that you're afraid of him, don't we? We know that they can tell when you're afraid of them. And when you are, they tend to be more aggressive. If you think that's true of dogs, you haven't seen anything until you get involved with the devil. Notice he says, in nothing terrified by your adversaries, which is to them an evident token of perdition. The very fact that you stand up, the very fact that you look them in the eye while you are enduring whatever is coming your way, the very fact that you won't quit, the very fact that you won't hang your head, the very fact that you won't tuck your tail between your legs and run, the very fact that you won't give up, is an evident token of perdition. Theirs. Once again, it's a chip that God puts on the table. You are the chip. Your life is the chip. The fact that you are enduring is the chip, and he shoves it out there, and they look at it, and they know what it means to them. It's an evident token, he said, of perdition to those people. He said, I want your conversation to be this way, to strive together for the faith of the gospels. Is to them an evident token of perdition, but to you of salvation, and that of God. For unto you it is given in behalf of Christ, not only to believe on him, but also to suffer for his sake. Now that's an interesting thought, isn't it? I've heard from a lot of preachers in my lifetime that to you it is given to believe on the Lord Jesus Christ and you shall be saved. I have not heard that many of them tell me it is given to you, like a gift, wrapped up in a package with a bow on it, not only to believe on it, but another gift that's given to you is to suffer for his name's sake. The earlier scripture in Thessalonians we read said that this is an evident token of the righteous judgment of God, and it goes on to say, who will render to these people who are afflicting you according to their works. Now that I can identify with. The very fact that we put up with it, the very fact that we are strong through it, the very fact that we endure it, is a manifest token of what God is going to do. You don't have to do it. And sometimes the fact that we endure, sometimes the fact that we won't give up, makes it worse. It makes it worse. But unfortunately, I suppose, in one sense of the word for us, but fortunately in the long run, that's our job, is to let it become worse and to endure the worst and to hold up to it. Now, I want you to think about Jesus Christ for a moment and his example. There's something quite similar to this back in the 10th chapter of Matthew that he said in his teachings to his disciples. In Matthew chapter 10 and verse 24, the disciple, actually I think I want to begin quite a bit earlier than that. Let's start in verse 16. Behold, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. You therefore be as wise as serpent, but as harmless as doves. But beware of men, you sure need to look out for them, for they will deliver you up to the councils, they will scourge you in their synagogues, and you shall be brought before governors and kings for my sake and for a testimony against them. You'll be brought before the Gentiles. When they deliver you up, take no thought how or what you shall speak. All right, you've heard that before, right? Don't bother sitting around figuring out what you're going to speak, because it'll be given to you in the same hour what you shall speak. It is not you that speak, but the Spirit of your Father that speaks in you. Brother will deliver up brother to death, the father the child. The children shall rise up against their parents and cause them to be put to death. You shall be hated of all men for my name's sake. But he that endures to the end shall be saved. Now, the idea that is presented here is of hatred, of being despised, of being persecuted. This is what Jesus told us we had to do. Now let me ask you this. Is it reasonable to you to assume that a leader would ever ask his people to do something that he was not willing to do himself. So when Jesus says to us, you have got to be prepared to endure this persecution. You've got to be prepared to undergo all of this, all the way to the very bitter end. That he was going, and when he said it, knew he was going to do precisely that himself. Now the story is familiar to you, but I want you to turn back anyway to the 26th chapter of the book of Matthew, because there are some things here I think that are important for us to understand. Jesus, of course, with his disciples, has gone through the entirety of the Passover service, told his disciples what it was that he was going to begin doing, and then finally he takes them into the garden. In verse 36 of Matthew 26, he says, Then comes Jesus with them into a place called Gethsemane, and he said to the disciples, Sit here while I go over there and pray. He took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee and began to be very sorrowful and very heavy. And he said to them, My soul is exceeding sorrowful, even unto death. I want you to stay here, and I want you to watch with me. He went on a little further, and he fell on his face and prayed, saying, O my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. He did this, we are told, we put the accounts together 3 times. And one occasion his sweat was like great drops of blood. I can conclude from this that he does not expect us to go into a trial or to endure a trial with equanimity. That is, without, oh, it's no big deal, I can carry this, it's not hard, it's wonderful. I think there is the full understanding that there is nothing wrong with us getting on our knees and crying out to God to take it away. There's nothing wrong with us going to God and saying, Father, don't make me do this. Father, give me a break on this, and let's don't have it this way. And to continue to pray about that and to look for God's will. Because Jesus did. But what is interesting as you read through these accounts, that there is a progression in the way he prays. Where first of all, let this cup pass from me, if it can be done. Later he says, now if it's possible, let this cup pass from me, but I want your will to be done. Then finally he says, well, if it's not possible for this cup to pass from me, thy will be done. We also, I think, sometimes grow into an awareness of what we have to endure. And one of the beauties of our relationship with God is that he allows us to come to him as often and as long and as many times and as persistently as we might ever want to do. And it's oftentimes in this coming to him again and again and again that we can slowly begin to learn, to understand, to grapple with, and so that finally what it is that we are enduring and lasting through and sticking out comes to have some meaning to us. It's not just a meaningless happenstance. It's not just an accident. It's not just bad luck. It's just not, that God has lost interest in me or doesn't care about me anymore. That there can come to be an understanding of what it is that has to be done. Jesus, by this time in his ministry, had basically done everything it was that he had to do. His last prayer with the disciples in John 17. I've finished the work you gave me to do. I've healed the sick. I've bound up healed the brokenhearted. I've done all these things. I've preached the gospel. I've made known the kingdom of God. I've finished the work, and I'm coming to you, and I'm going to pray for these people I'm leaving behind. This was his prayer before he went away from them, and then went through this particular agony because he knew what he himself had to do and what he had to go through. It is also something important to understand, I believe, that when he came back and he found his disciples asleep, that it's easy at a time like that to blame your friends. It's easy like that at a time when to feel like you're not getting the kind of support you can. But he recognized the flesh was willing, the spirit was willing, but the flesh was weak. And there was even a tolerance for the weakness of his disciples at this point, because there comes a point where you have to realize that there's nothing your friends can do for you either. You're really beyond helping. The thing is out of control. And there's no point in getting mad at your friends because they don't feel what you do, because probably they can't feel what you do. He continued to pray, and finally he came to them. Verse 45, they were asleep again. He says, sleep on now and take your rest. The hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hand of sinners. Rise, let's be going, because he is at hand that does betray me. So while he spoke, Judas, one of the 12, came, and with him a great multitude with swords and staves, from the chief priests and elders of the people. And he that betrayed him gave them a sign, saying, Whoever I kiss, that's him, hold him fast. And so he came to him and kissed him and said, Hail, Master. And Jesus said, Friend, where have you come from? And then they ran up and arrested him. He betrayed him with a quick kiss. Now let's think about that for a moment. I don't know that Judas was Jesus' closest friend. Every indication is that that was John. And yet, in the Scriptures, he talks of him as mine own familiar friend in whom I trusted. It's an odd contradiction in this. He says, in whom I trusted, and yet he also knew from the beginning who it was that he was going to betray him. I conclude from that what he means by that is that I put a trust in him. Not that I felt a trust toward him, because he knew that he was eventually going to betray him, but my own familiar friend. I was a friend to this person. Notice, Judas, was he a friend to Christ? Maybe he was at one time. That's not the point. Jesus was always a friend to him. One of the most painful things that can happen to you is to be betrayed by someone to whom you have been a friend and in whom you have placed trust. But there was nothing Jesus could do about it, was there? At this point, it was out of his hands. All he could say to Judas on one of the other accounts says, Friend, do you betray the Son of Man with a kiss? And anyway, the story goes on that Jesus, having said that, one of them, with him, verse 51, stretched out his hand, drew his sword, and struck a servant of the high priest, and smote off his ear, just hacked his ear off, and fell on the ground. And Jesus said to him, Put up again your sword into his place, for all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. Do you imagine that I cannot now pray to my Father, and he shall presently give me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then shall the Scriptures be fulfilled, that this it must be? Now, I think that you and I tend, as I said earlier, to think of enduring as a passive act. We just sit there and suffer. But here is a situation where Jesus has been arrested. There is something he could do about it, but he makes a positive decision not to do it. I could pray the Father. He would send a legion of angels, and this whole thing is over, right? But he said, if I do that, how can God's purpose be served? How can the Scriptures be fulfilled? How can this be accomplished? Now, I don't mean to suggest that you individually, if you have a way to get out of your suffering, should not necessarily take it, but on the other hand, what is the price you're being called upon to pay? What is it you're trying to get out from under? What is it you're trying not to do? And what do you have to do to get away from it? There is a point in time where you have to make a positive decision, and to make the positive act of enduring is such that you have to decide that you are going to endure, that you're going to suffer it, that you're going to stick it out, that you're going to put up with it, that you're going to bear up under things that you might be able to find a way out of if you were just willing to compromise with what you knew it was right to do. It's as simple as that. Here he had the option, and a great conflict, a desire not to have to go through what he was going through, a responsibility, though, to bear it out, and the power to walk away from it. I can call a legion of angels and it's over. Well, enduring then sometimes requires you to make a positive decision, not to give it up, but to bear up under it. In that same hour, said Jesus to the multitudes, Are you come out against a thief with swords and staves to take me? I sat daily with you teaching in the temple, and you did not even touch me. All this was done that the Scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled. Then all the disciples forsook him and fled. They just ran for their lives. And, you look back on it and you feel a certain contempt because they ran off and left him at this time. But I can assure you that if you had been there, you would have ran. Wouldn't you? You'd have been up one hill and down the next and out of sight as fast as you could get there. We often criticize Peter because he denied Christ. Do you realize Peter may have been the most courageous one of all of them? At least he hung around. The rest of them were nowhere to be seen. With the fact that he actually put himself in the position to where he was challenged. He had a chance to put up or shut up, and then when it came to it, he denied Christ. But at least he hung around. The rest of them were nowhere to be found. Nobody was able to challenge them. They didn't give anybody even the chance to say, hey, you were with him, I saw you with him. So you wouldn't have to deny what they said. How does it feel to have all your friends run off and leave you? Jesus had, at that point in time, no choice, did he? All he could do was endure it. He couldn't cry about it. He couldn't let someone see his disappointment. He couldn't allow certain things to happen. He had to just stand there and watch them disappear and say, well, you know, they're going to, I kind of feel sorry for them because I know they are going to really feel rotten. And indeed, Peter did. By the time all was said and done, it says he went out and just wept bitterly. They that had laid hold on Jesus led him away to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and the elders were assembled. Peter followed him. He was way back there, though, in the high priest's palace, and went to see the end. He wanted to see how it would all play out. The chief priests and the elders all sought false witness against Jesus to put him to death, but they found none. Yea, though many false witnesses came, they couldn't find one. And only at the last were they finally able to find a couple of liars that would stand up and say what they wanted him to say. They said, this fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to build it in 3 days. The high priest arose and said to him, are you going to answer nothing? What is it that these people witness against you? But Jesus held his peace. He did not even open his mouth. Now that in itself is a fascinating thing. It was not for him to stand there and defend himself. It was not there for him to deny the charges. He was not there to do anything but he was there to do something, wasn't he? He was there to endure whatever it was they were going to do to him. He had to last. He had to stick it out. He had to have that staying power to stay in it to the bitter end, regardless of what they said, regardless of the lies. And it hurts when people lie about you. But he didn't even say a word to defend himself.
This is the end of side 1. Please fast forward and flip tape over to side 2.
The high priest then says, I adjure you by the living God that you tell us whether you are the Christ, the Son of God. Now, at this point, Jesus has no choice. The law of God, found not in the Ten Commandments, but in the statutes and judgments that follow on, that the law required that if you hear the voice of adjuration, that is, it was their equivalent of the oath to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, but you didn't say, so help me God, and hold up your right hand and all this type of thing. If you were present, they read the adjuration, and you failed to bear witness, you were guilty of perjury. Whether you even opened your mouth. You didn't have to lie. You just had to know something and not come forward with it when they adjured you to speak. So when he commanded him to speak, with his authority as a judge, Jesus had no choice. He says, I command you to tell us. Jesus said, thou hast said. You said it. Nevertheless, I say unto you, hereafter you shall see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven. He went right ahead, agreed to it, and expressed it in such a way that it would ensure that he went on through the remainder of the trial, that they weren't going to let him go. Not that there was any chance of that. The high priest rent his clothes, saying, he has spoken blasphemy. What need do we have of further witnesses? You have heard his blasphemy. We don't need these. We don't even need these false witnesses anymore. It's out of his own mouth now. He's a blasphemer. What do you think? They all said, he's guilty of death. So they spit in his face. They buffeted him with the palms of his hand, with their hands, saying, prophesy to us, you Christ, who smote you? So at this point, would you agree that events were kind of out of control? That he was in their power? There was really, at this point of time, nothing that he could do. Well, there was one thing he could do. He could endure it. He could stand up. He could look them in the eye. He could stand fast. He could refuse to be cowed. He could refuse to give any indication that he was going to buckle under pressure. He could stick it out. He could do that. And in fact, that was precisely what he had to do. Now, I'm going through all this to remind us of the fact. None of us have ever even gotten close to this point. The fact is that if they had you up in irons, and they were beating you and knocking you around like this, and you were in this situation, it might be easier for you to stick your guns there than it is now. Because really, he knew there was no way out. No matter what he said, they were going to kill him. He knew it because he knew human nature. He knew it because he knew the prophecies. He knew it because that was what he was there for. And I can't help but, I've often thought about this, that when it gets right up against it and someone puts you to the extreme test and where you have no question what's going on, I think sometimes we might stand up to that better than we do to the little things, the minor challenges, the small enduring that we have to do on a day-to-day basis. All those times when we get to the end of our rope, let it go. Just let it go. I've done it. You've done it. We've all done it. Just like the disciples. They got to the end of the rope and they didn't just let it go. They dropped it and ran. So I don't think we are any better than they. I certainly make no claim to be better than they or stronger than they or anything of the sort. We just need to understand. So they smote him, spit on him, slapped his face. I mean, that hurts. When somebody calls, a big man gets up with a big old hoary hand and slap you across your face, that's going to hurt bad. All he did was just take it. But I know what he did. I know he looked at him. He looked right into his eyes. He would not, I have very little doubt that through this whole thing, that Jesus would not look down. He wouldn't look away in the hopes of reducing his punishment. He looked him right in the eye, which did what? Infuriated him. But at every moment of time, every instance, everything that happened was a manifest token of the righteous judgment of God that what he was going to do was right. Now Peter sat without the palace, we're told, and a damsel came to him and said, "You were with him." He denied before them all, saying, I don't know what you're talking about. I am so glad this is here. I am really glad that this is here. Because otherwise I might not realize that I could still have the love and the compassion and the mercy of Christ after some of the things that I've done in my life. Because there are things that I have done that could be construed as denying Christ. There are things that I have done when I knew better and knew I should not have done them. And here's a man who knew better, and even Jesus had told him what he was going to do. And even had him been told he was going to deny Christ 3 times, and even had he denied that he would do it, he stood right there and did it. It's a tremendous thing for me to look at this and realize that here's a man who, when all was said and done, the worst thing Jesus put him through was on that last night. When he said, "Simon, son of Jonas, do you love me?" Now, I do believe that had to hurt. When Jesus challenged him on that after the resurrection, they're up at the Sea of Galilee and they're cold, fish are on the fire, and he's walked off to one side with Peter. "You really love me?" He said, "Oh, you know I love you." And he says, "Will you feed my sheep then?" Now, a little bit later he says, "Simon, son of Joseph, you sure you love me?" "Lord, you know I love you." "Feed my sheep." He did that to him 3 times. And, there's no question in my mind how Peter felt about that, and that he reflected on that many times and realizing the reason I had to be asked that question 3 times was because I denied Christ 3 times. And he wanted those 3 affirmations. Those 3 affirmations, by the way, from Peter were not for Jesus' sake. You do understand that, don't you? They were for Peter's sake. They were for Peter's sake. He wanted him to say the words with his mouth. "Lord, you know I love you." He did crawfish, by the way. He crawfished. But Jesus pressed him again and again. And it was for Peter's sake that challenge was made, so that Peter, in the repeated affirmation, "You know that I love you," was strengthened himself because of the things that he was going to have to undergo. I sometimes think that in our lives, as we live them out and we struggle with the things, there are those occasions when Jesus, in some way or other in our life says, "You love me? Do you really love me?" And he forces you to say in some way in your life, "Lord, you know everything. You know I love you." Because it's a funny thing. When you make that affirmation, you are strengthened in your resolve. I recently was called on jury duty and was sitting in the voir dire procedure where the attorneys are doing all this questioning of jurors. And they'd get them, is there anybody here who has this experience? And they ask you to stand up. Somebody would come around with a microphone. 300 of us in there. And so they had a microphone, and he would say, "Now, this thing, let's say you've read all this stuff in the newspaper. Would you have any problem Putting all that out of your mind and making a decision solely on the basis of the evidence in court. And they'd say, well, yes, I could do that. Fine, sit down. And we go on to the next person right on through there. I asked myself at one point, why is he doing all this? And it dawned on me. You get in the jury room, having said, no, I can make a decision based on the facts. You are far more likely to do it having said you would. Right? Makes it harder to back down. Where have your affirmations been coming from? You know, you really do need, at some way, and somehow in your life, if you're going to be able to endure, stick it out, hang in there, and be right there for it, there need to be affirmations of Christ in your life. There need to be those times when you say, yeah, I do love you. Yes, I do understand what you expect of me. Yes, I will do it. And you don't say these things in private in the prayer closet. That's fine to say it there. And you don't need to go up to a friend here and say it. What you need to do is to say it with your life. To actually make those public or semi-public affirmations. I tell you, if you're just trying to lose weight, it's a help to tell your friends you're trying to lose weight. Because when you tell them you're trying to lose weight, it puts just that much pressure on you. Take it off. Because they're going to go wondering, he said he wasn't going to lose that weight. He still looks fat to me. So saying you're going to do it helps you do it. Saying that you're going to endure to the end, making that affirmation. And I will say this, I don't mean to demean that at all. Saying it in prayer is more important than you will ever know. Yes, Lord, I do love you. Yes, I am going to try. Yeah, I am weak, but I understand what I'm supposed to do, and with your help, I'm going to do it. Those affirmations are important, powerfully important. In chapter 27, the morning was come. All the chief priests and elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. And when they had bound him and led him away, they delivered him to Pontius Pilate, the governor. And Judas, which had betrayed him, saw that he was condemned. He repented himself. You know what's funny about this? Judas couldn't even stick it out on the other side of the coin. He couldn't even stick out what he had done. He flip-flopped on them and came back in and said, I betrayed innocent blood. They said, what's that to us? That's your problem. And he casts down the silver and goes out and hangs himself. Judas is a classic loser. He couldn't even stay the course in his own betrayal. It's a striking thing, but there it is. And so it is that all the rest of these things took place. In verse 11, Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, saying, Are you the king of the Jews? Jesus said to him, You said it. And when he was accused of the chief priests and elders, he answered nothing. That's all he would say. I am that, and there was nothing more to say. Then said Pilate to him, Do you hear how many things they witness against you? He said, didn't say a word. And Pilate sat there and just marveled. And another account says, he said, Don't you understand what's happening here, man? I have the power to release you or to condemn you. Jesus' response, You would have no power except it was given to you by my Father which is in heaven. This is a man who is enduring something that he has to do. When he had done everything he could do, when he had performed all the acts of his ministry, when he had taught, preached, witnessed to all the world, when he had healed the sick, when he had performed miracles and walked on the water, when he had finished, and everything was all done, he had one more thing to do, and that was to endure, to stick it out right to the bitter end. Finally, in verse 26, it says, He released Barabbas, and when he had scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus to the common hall. They gathered the whole band of soldiers, and they stripped him, took his clothes off, let him stand there stark naked in front of everybody. They took a crown of thorns and put it on his head and a reed in his right hand. They bowed the knee before him and mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews! They spit on him. Then they took the reed out of his hand, jerked that away, and then hit him on the head with it. Total humiliation. Not only is there in this the fact that he was going to die, there was the fact of enormous amount of inflicted pain, the scourging, and then there was not only the pain, there was the humiliation. And then there was not only the humiliation, there was the hurt from being betrayed and left and having all of your disciples run away from you. And having one of those people whom you trust sell you out. I don't think any of us have any idea the pain that he was under, physically, emotionally, and spiritually at this moment of time. And then finally, when all is said and done, when they had crucified him and he was hanging on the stake, there was still one more thing he had to endure. The cosmic loneliness of having the Father turn his back on him and saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? This is what I call enduring. He was helpless. He was in their power. But in another way, he was a long way from helpless. Because what he was doing, what they were doing to him, and what he was enduring was going to be the salvation of your life. Was going to be what turns your life around. What gives you the power to be able to endure and to overcome. What gives you the opportunity to be in a resurrection and to come up as one whose own face will shine like the sun in its strength and who will be able to come into the presence of God and see Him as He is. All that depended on a situation where Jesus, to all intents and purposes, did nothing. But then He did do something, didn't He? He stayed the course. He endured. He lasted. I want you to turn back finally with me, the last scripture today, to the 12th chapter of the book of Hebrews. This is a chapter we're familiar with because it talks about the chastisement that comes our way from God. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1. He says, seeing we also are compassed about with this tremendous cloud of witnesses, and he has in the chapters leading up into this, particularly the 11th chapter, which is the faith chapter, given us this incredibly detailed account of all these people and all the stuff they had gone through and endured and suffered for the sake of Jesus Christ, or that is of God, and what God was doing in them in their lives. He said, look at this cloud of witnesses we have got all around us. Let's lay aside every weight and the sin that does so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. You have got to keep running. You have got to endure the pain. You have got to endure the boredom. You've got to endure the sacrifice. It's something you've got to keep doing, because it isn't the first lap or the second lap or the third lap that wins. You have got to be there at the finish. Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before Him endured the cross. He endured it. He didn't just take it. He bore it. He carried it. He actually wore it. He bore His own cross up the hill where He was going to be crucified. It wasn't carried up there for Him. He actually participated in this thing. Isn't that interesting? He actually picked it up and carried it. You could have said, you're going to kill me here if you want. I'm not carrying that thing. But He picked it up and He carried it. And that's why He says to us, if any man would come after me, let him pick up his cross and follow me. What He is saying in simplest possible terms is, you are going to have to, not passively, but positively, actively endure. Endure suffering, endure hardship, endure loss, endure pain. You are going to have to endure, God says to you, whatever I ask you to endure. Whatever it is. He said, for the joy that was set before Him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. I want you to think for a moment about Him that endured such contradiction of sinners against Himself, lest you be wearied and faint in your minds. You have not yet resisted unto blood, striving against sin. And truer words were never spoken. Here I stand before you right now. I have never in my life, with all of whatever I think is hardship, whatever I think might be privation, whatever embarrassment, whatever difficulty, whatever struggle, I have never yet shed one drop of my blood in defense of the gospel. And most of us, I think any of us, just all of us, we have not. He said, you really ought to think about this once in a while when you think you're hurting and when you think you're in trouble and when you're embarrassed or you're having difficulty because of the faith or the truth or your life or how you're trying to live it, when it looks like the whole thing's coming down around your ears, you really ought to stop once in a while and think that Jesus picked up the cross. He endured it. He didn't just have it happen to Him. And that He expects you to do the same. And you have not even gotten close to shedding your blood. You have not yet resisted unto blood striving against sin. You have forgotten the exhortation that speaks unto you as children. My son, despise not the chastening of the Lord, nor faint when you are rebuked of him. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens, and he scourges every son whom he receives. If we endure chastening, endure chastening. Listen, this is not just letting it happen to you. This is accepting it. Enduring is a positive, active thing that we do even when we're locked up in jail with our hands and feet tied. It is not just something that happens, it is something that you accept. You pick it up. You wear it. You accept it. He said, every son whom God loves, he chastens and scourges every son that he receives. If you endure chastening, God deals with you as with sons. What son is he whom the Lord does not chastise? If you haven't had any chastisement, whereof all God's sons are partakers, then are you bastards, not sons, not sons of God. You haven't gotten in there and borne it and accepted it and worn it and carried on. When God chastises His children. We have had fathers of our flesh that corrected us and we gave them reverence. Shall we not much rather be in subjection to the Father of spirits and live? You know, for a few days our fathers chastened us according to their pleasure. I mean, not because they got pleasure out of it, but as it pleased them or as it seemed good to them. But God has chastened us for our profit, that we might be partakers of His holiness. Now, no chastening seems pleasant at the present time. And it just doesn't. There's no way in the world when it's going on that you can really enjoy it or feel it that way. Nevertheless, afterward it yields the fruit of righteousness to them that are exercised thereby. Wherefore, lift up the hands that hang down. You know, straighten up your spine. Put your shoulders back. And look the world in the eye. Then straighten up those feeble knees that are all bent, you know. Lock them in place and get your back straight and look at the world in the eye. Make straight paths for your feet, lest that which is lame be turned out of the way. He said, follow peace with all men and holiness, without which no man shall see the Lord. Looking diligently, lest any man fail of the grace of God. How would that happen? Well, he said looking diligently. I would assume being slothful or slack or letting it go or giving up. Lest any man fail of the grace of God. Lest any root of bitterness spring up and trouble you, and thereby many be defiled. Lest there be any fornicator or, and here he switches to a fascinating illustration, or a profane person like Esau, who because he was hungry, sold his birthright. Esau could not even endure hunger for the sake of his birthright. It's no coincidence, I think, that God requires us one day a year to go without food. He wants us to fast. He wants us to learn what it's like to be hungry. He wants us to feel it. Esau was hungry. For one morsel of food, he sold his birthright. And you know how that afterward he would have inherited the blessing. He wanted it. He was rejected, for he found no place for repentance, though he sought it carefully with tears. For you are not come to the mount that might be touched, or that burned with fire. You haven't come to blackness and darkness and tempest like the children of Israel did at Mount Sinai. Oh, no. He said, verse 22, you are come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, to the heavenly Jerusalem, to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and church of the firstborn that are written in heaven. You have come to God, the judge of all, and the spirits of just men made perfect. You've come to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and the blood of sprinkling that speaks better things than of Abel. See that you refuse not him that speaks. Straighten up. Don't go around hangdog. Don't let this thing get away from you just because you are called upon to last, to stick it out. If they escape not him that spoke on earth, do you think we're going to escape if we refuse him who spoke from heaven, whose voice then shook the earth, but now he has promised the time is coming when I'm not going to shake the earth. You're not going to have to worry about the fault over by Memphis. I'm going to shake the heavens and the earth. And he signified by this the removing of those things that are shaken as of things that are made, so that only the things that cannot be shaken remain. Guess what that's going to be? Better yet, guess who that's going to be? That's going to be those people who were able and willing to endure who positively endured, who actively endured, who willingly accepted the burden that was laid upon them, who willingly accepted the chastisement of God, who were grateful for the chastisement of God after it was over, who pick up their cross and couple and who endure because they have to endure. The people who look them in the eye and don't give up. The people who don't go around looking whipped. The people who don't cash in their chips before the game is over. The people who stay to the end. These are those that cannot be shaken. And there's no way, folks, to find out what can't be shaken without doing some shaking. And there's no way to find out who will endure without turning up the heat. Wherefore, we receiving a kingdom which cannot be moved, let us have grace whereby we may serve God acceptably, with reverence, and with godly fear, for our God is a consuming fire. You know, sometimes, when we think there is nothing else we can do, the most important thing we will ever do is still ahead, to endure.